let's see, this video, or this vlog, whatever you call it, is going to be the Celluloid Dream. And the book, this is mainly like kind of about, I guess. It's not really just about it, but this book really, it like inspired me quite a bit. Same with Dark Doorway of the Beast. I found this, I think, around the same time, maybe a little before, but it says a lot of things that I, like myself as a kid, kind of wondered just about. Obviously how light and space and time are limited, and yet like our ability to talk about it is also limited. And so it's very difficult to get over that whole little gap, I guess, and have like a freedom of association and free, just all that. And so finding this book was really interesting. And so I do quote like the intro, I think. And I don't know, it's just really, it's weird that the author, he's like pretty important. Apparently even he got Einstein's attention, and yet for whatever reason it's not like available, and yet it's from 1945. But Samuel Roth, who wrote it, he was involved in like some publishing sort of issues, I guess, First Amendment stuff. But he also wrote a book, which I didn't even realize till I was just going back over this, but something called like Jews Must Live, and they got that surprisingly available, which he was Jewish, but he wrote this book that was, I guess, pretty controversial. But what isn't? I'm sure it's controversial that I mention it. But this guy, like, I don't know, when I search for references, he's oddly left out. And yet, I don't know, the cover art is kind of interesting, and that's what caught my eye originally. But it's all about how everything's not just what you see. Like, it says, about the appearance of all things, except those which we see in our inmost feelings, there is an element of illusion which makes it impossible for anyone to say that he knows one of them as it really is. Take the table before you. If anyone walked into your room, he could not possibly see it in the form in which it appears to you, so that you would both be seeing different tables, neither of which resembled the image in the mind of the man who built it. This is due to the fact that all things in the outer world have to be seen at an angle, and therefore, again, space and time. So, like, seriously, this whole book, I have been struggling with, like, how am I going to try to condense all of this? But the only thing I can really do is hopefully eventually make a PDF, same with some other books that need it, that are past the copyright or whatever. It's almost like there's certain literary people who know about some of this stuff and they haven't wanted it out there. So yeah, I just have a lot of other stuff pulled up I'll go through as I read through this, but that's what this is mainly about, and so we'll get to it. I just wanted to give, I guess, a little bit of a background, a preface or whatever. But I gave a quote from H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu, which I found fitting. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. And again, the peephole of the present. We only have, like, I don't know, we're always chasing our tails. Which I'll get into this whole, in post 56, Signals from the Sun, I was talking about some interesting geometry dealing with the circle, 360, 7, and then also 6 circles, and also the Shabbat, the 7th circle, that implies like a higher rung in time, essentially, which it's very arcane and esoteric, but John Dee apparently even knew about it, like I said, and there's a lot of stuff to go through, but I have to give all this sort of like this bridge of connections, all these contextual clues, I guess, that run their course. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but some day the piercing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality, and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. So, yeah. As we can see, that's pretty much what I'm seeing, just with the quantum overlay of all this stuff, especially, again, like I've been saying, if you organize it Kabbalistically, the alignments are just too much, like, for anyone to anticipate alone. But anyway, an intriguing book became known to me right after I finished reading Dark Doorway of the Beast, together with Soror 722. Yeah, we read that chapter by chapter over the phone, which was really powerful for me. I mean, for both of us, but I really need to, I don't know. I wonder about making this whole thing available, and I wonder why it isn't in the first place. It's a huge key to the sort of psychological pragmatism of all this sort of, again, occult shit, the disparate, I mean, really Doth, obviously, is what it's referring to, and Doth is a sort of confusing mass of knowledge, information, contradictions, which oddly enough follows in a lot the same vein regarding the window of thought, the matrix of operation, the browser of the mind, which that brings up all this other stuff. Hold on. The field of being, the web of manifestation, etc. The book is entitled The Peephole of the Present, an inquiry into the substance of appearance, by Samuel Roth and prefaced by Sir Arthur Eddington, and was originally published in the Start of the Atomic Age, 1945, and reprinted in 1953 with a more artistic and atomic saturnine cover by Boar's Head Books. Makes me think of Francis Bacon, because that came up again. The book has no connection really, other than just, to me, it's like, I don't know, all these little fucking things everywhere. The book has too many different directions to cover completely, because again, it's like an experiment in time, in that reading it opens your mind to see, like, just with your mind itself as a much broader faculty than I guess we give ourselves credit. But some pertinent rays have gleamed through to me, especially in relation to the Dark Doorway of Doth, and I would like to work through some of them here, because again, it's all geometry, and even though numbers, obviously, there's a weird duality in that you would like calculating and wondering what the numbers are, and obviously the fact numbers, and it's all somewhat arbitrary. In a sense, though, that's where the teaching of the logos and how language and etymology and operating systems comes in, and relativity and recursivity. It seems, again, arbitrary and insignificant, but for whatever reason, things do fall into play in a weird place in studying the Lankavatara Sutra, Rationes Seminales, and our seed principles, like just these different philosophical ideas about, again, time being a complex, like, almost organism in a sense. Like, that's where, I mean, so many things come to mind, just all the different Hinduism things I've been studying. Like, clearly they knew, and that, I don't know, our limited understanding and perception is really going to cloud our ability to, well, then again, like H.P. Lovecraft said, terrifying vistas of reality can also open up, so it's no wonder, but as an inquiry into the substance of appearance, it starts by discussing some of the major lines of Occidental thought, from Pythagoras to Einstein, and the gradual, he goes through quite a bit. That's why I wish I could go over it, but it's just too broad, really. I mean, eventually it'll be public, so here pretty soon I'll put it on archive or something. In the gradual advancement and perspective of our own scope of being as humans, going from a more materialistic and ego and geocentric mentality to being able to see things more holistically and from a higher perspective than is merely allowed from on the ground without telescopes or satellites or long records of astronomical observation. As our window of perception grew wider, the light of the intellect grew brighter. And it makes me think, I just saw, like before doing this, that the largest 3D model of the universe was like released or is made. I don't know what status, I didn't read the whole thing, but it's funny. As I make progressions through this blog, like little, reflections come through. Our angle became more fluidic and we learned to see beyond our own point of view. It may help to quote in the dust jacket to give a better synopsis of the attitude of this book. So I begin that. I think I read to that. So, as there is nothing in the outer world which is not fully represented in the inner, the author of The People of the Present brought to the latter the most important of the world's problems. And the result is a complete overturning of all prevailing conceptions of time, space, and matter, and the emergence of the image of the world in its most amazing form possible, the one in which we actually see it. A revolution involving such fearful simplicities that, as the great Eddington hints in his preface, it may take science a long time to encompass it. Yeah. I have to set out, says the author in his dedicatory note to Einstein, to demonstrate that light, which deceives us in so many trifles, paints truly for us the size, shape, and nature of the world. That, instead of being rushed to us from distant places at 186,000 miles a second, this portrait is homogeneous to us with every breath we take, with every sensation we register, and that the fundamental living element is not some strange, incomprehensible ether, but consciousness, the inescapable source of our kinship with all things. So again, the web of manifestation, and not just being mental, but also in some weird way, like I think of the micro and macrocosmic expression, I guess, of heart and mind, and then its magnetization into time or physicality. The dedicatory note mentioned from which the quote derives is worth considering, as he finds it imperative to challenge Einstein, despite knowing it may come as unappreciated. So he says, Dear Dr. Einstein, it was kind of you to read the galleys of my book, still kinder to speak your mind so plainly. The matter would have been allowed to rest where you left it at the end of your letter, but for its last sentence which left me uneasy, as if I were in danger of neglecting your grave responsibility for no better reason than that you are so luminous in a world in which I am so obscure. And you had only said something, you had said, I must confess that I consider common language as a tool not of adequate precision for the treatment of questions concerning the fundaments of physics. In much the same spirit, Plato is reputed admission to his academy to those who were not trained in mathematics. I write to you again, in spite of a latent fear that it may cause you annoyance, only because those random, easily thrown-out words of yours have been crowding in on me from all sides, concerning me at odd moments, and reprimanding me. We know it's Einstein, but he's mistaken. What does it matter how much wiser than you he is on so many other things, if in this important one he is mistaken? You must write to correct him, even if he won't listen. Quantitative essence, developed in a long line from Pythagoras to Plato to Weil and Einstein, resides not in any of the mathematical formulae of the last 2,500 years, but in the original meanings with which first things, then sounds, then written words invested them. If numbers, presumably your alternate precision language, are capable of reference to objects in any field of thinking, it is only by a reduction of those objects to their special roles as mathematical figures. But these roles were originally conceived and set down in the common language by which they are still governed. In this common language I have set out to demonstrate that light, which deceives us in so many trifles, paints for us truly the size, shape, and nature of the world, that instead of being rushed to us from different distant places at 186,000 miles a second, this portrait is homogeneous to us with every breath we take, with every sensation we register, and that the fundamental living element is not some strange incomprehensible ether, but consciousness, the inescapable source of our kinship with all things. So again, if it's a magnetic recursive loop, then or series. But have you forgotten that we are still in the stage of breaking up the great boulders and chopping down the primeval redwoods? When we get down to analyzing the smaller units of matter, such as the particles of consciousness, it will be time enough to worry about the need of precision instruments. Sincerely yours, Samuel Roth, January 31st, 1945. So, I don't know, that makes me think of, just recently I've been thinking of this whole concept of the garland of letters, or varnas, and how even in these other languages, they still overlap. So what was I going to say? I wanted to see, when did that one book come out, and when did this come out? Okay, so 34. I was wondering if it was after, because apparently Einstein didn't take much time to consider whatever he was saying. Let's see, I'm not bring all that up yet. So, after the introduction, the building and rebuilding of a model, Roth begins discussing space and the luminum by which it generates. The luminum is the immaterial source of light, propagated by friction, whereas space is the material continuum of it. He says, as the all-in-one, space is material, electrical, living, sensitive, and conscious, simultaneously and everywhere. In the overall process, every phenomenal attribute of the world first grows out of space, then recedes back into it to await new redevelopment. What a multitude of names and ideas have been mustered out of the imagination of man to cover this simple act of forming, receding, and reforming. So commonplace a phenomena as a man and woman meeting, acting upon earth with a powerful attraction. Jesus. Begetting offspring has been described by such popular profundities as love, sex, romance, the sacrament of marriage, and the maintenance of the race, when what has really transpired is that through the exercise of an overpowering influence, something was taken out of the plenum of man to create a plethora in a woman, with all parties eventually returned to normal by the severance of a child into a new individuality. There is not a form in the world, be it a tree, a rock, a cloud, a flower, a lake, or a kitten, that does not make its appearance in the very same way. As for its exit, it is unnecessary to invent heavenly futures or theories such as that of transmigration of the soul to account for the return of the individual elements into the raw material of creation, after their task in the cosmos has been completed. So this also makes me remember this weird concept, I guess, that unraveled in my mind just like yesterday, which was that the elements are densifications of Akasha in their own respective, like, yin and yang manner. It's very, I guess, I don't know, because studying I Ching and all that just makes me see the essential, just it's all polarities. But after their task in the cosmos has been completed, one can be certain that these individual elements are only too happy to return to the endless and magnificent adventures of redistribution into other forms. The immediate cause of all phenomena is friction heat. The true and underlying cause, however, is the tendency for all things in space to propagate. For this chief and possibly only business of propagation, space has major and minor instruments, every one of which must be examined in its proper place in the world's scheme. The greatest of these, the one which not only unites all matter but which also keeps it alive, the one by which light is propagated. This instrument is a very simple one and bears a strong resemblance to that common kitchen utensil, the gas range. We will call it the luminum. So let's see. I've got so much stuff pulled up, it's just all about what's happening now, because it's present. It's just, this makes me think of all the Hinduism concepts that I've been studying, Brahma, like I've been trying to sort out just the teachings and the differences of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Shakti, in all her forms, Ganesha, Aramba. So, since I've been analyzing the formula of 666 as a code for the key of it all, extensively, for the last year, and now what, 5? It has occurred to me that the hidden luminum light source is in fact the prismatic lens of the ego-forming faculty. So again, the ruach, the seed of life. The fallen keystone, which is Malkuth, or the daughter. The broken window of perception, which needs reparation through shedding its illusions in time. And so again, it makes me think of Parashakti, or Adi Parashakti, which also, I just found, like, I was like, who is Queen Sheba, or Queen of Sheba? And, apparently, Malka ShBA, or Malkuth, actually, Malkuth ShBA, is also 793, which I was talking about in the last few posts, actually, because it's the Transplutonic New Isis, Adi Parashakti, just all these weird things, and like, mathematically I then realized it's also 8 times 9 times 11, so 8 times 9 being 72, which 8 times 8, and then another 8, it's a weird concept, but go back to the whole concept of figurate numbers, and then what those figures represent, and the 8 and the 9 by the 11, and then plus 1, so the 1 in that whole sequence of space, time, and reflection, like, I don't know, the Queen of Sheba, it says she may not have even been a real person, like, she reminds me of Sophia in a sense, but, also the whole concept of, obviously, Jezebel, or, I don't know, just Adi Parashakti, or, not Durga, I forgot the other one. Anyway, it's easy to just, wonder, be in awe about all this stuff. But yeah, the 793, that came up yet again, like, all the time, and that number keeps coming up. That's how I know when certain like numbers come up. That's why I'm like, okay, gotta pay attention. The connection between the daughter, the final hay, which I found was 107, and the whole concept of the egg, the XYZ. Again, so it's this whole celluloid nature of time, especially as a day or a magnetic cycle. Obviously, there's lots of cycles all the way up and down the fractal, but the day and the year, the calendar is essentially super relevant for our mathematics here on Earth. Like in contemplating this, I have to say that because I wonder what, we have to use a little bit of geocentricity with, but also consider it from, like objectively. So I don't know. Too complicated to put into words. But anyway, the formula of the daughter, the final hay, tetragrammaton, is glyphed in the symbol of the magic egg, or bitza, the Hebrew word for egg. And the whole formula and all these links of the acausal 107. The space-time capsule of consciousness and rebirth, which again, the akasha, ulam, identity, thought, as well as 107, generated like the gold egg of Brahma and channeling forth the akasha. So again, it's magnetic aggregates, the unmanifest into ulam consciousness. 107 is thus a formula of manifestation par excellence. Hence Frater Chod's attribution of Ma-Ion, the ends of manifestation, referenced in the first and final verses of the chapter of Nuit in Library L. Had the manifestation of Nuit, and the manifestation of Nuit is at an end. As the simultaneous eternal, or the quantum foam, the seam of, and the source code of quantum foam, and the fractal of manifestation, is the monad of Hadit aflame in the womb of Nuit in the procreative act of cosmic union. So again, that the father and mother tattva is the Godhead, the great work. The friction of their interplay creates infinite bubbles. And like I always found that funny, like how bubble was 47 and ohm and all that, and then plural bubbles is literally the whole, again, the mathematical XYZ, the edges of which are that generative nature of the fourth or final hay, the fourth aspect of tetragrammaton. Like the flute play of Azathoth, who's also symbolized by like bubbles, at the center of manifestation. The dream conjuries of identity, which again, all the, they say is like not necessarily real. Well, I ended up finding Buddha land, like symbolic of the pure land, or there's different names for it, but where pure beings are. And whenever I did this, I always forget the name, the secret language of the soul thing, post 53, I had this vision of Sheba, like I saw everything underneath everything, and it's all about seeing magnetic and this whole concept of heat, hot points, numbers. There's a sort of heat signatures and all this, which define the boundaries of one's own window or peephole. Celluloid Dream. Oh yeah, whenever I was reading that book, he kept having like in italics, space, time, and light. And I calculated that, and I was like, oh my god, like what the fuck? Why? Like why so many particular things using, again, the same Hebrew formula with only there's only so many variations, like Samek, Shin, Teth, Tau, Gimel, Cheth, and like that just doesn't explain the highly specialized contextual historical development. I mean, I don't expect anyone to come in, like I'm wondering why there hasn't been like much. I mean, I don't know if there is an answer. I think that it's just, again, magnetic attraction. Space-time and light is 666, showing that not only is this a solar illuminating number, and again, 666 associated with electric and the spirit of fire, and then also that Saturnian ring of, not knowing, and just, I don't know, there is a limited nature to 666, and then the process of what I've come to see as what 777 represents is sort of like the rising up through that, I guess. The dark doorway of the beast being a gateway within, in that seventh step, in a sense. Obviously, again, it's esoteric. It sounds like crazy gobbledygook unless you have personally went through like Kabbalistic meditation, I guess, and see the holographic nature of these concepts. But also that of space and duration. So again, chronos, which from the dimensions of the which form the dimensions of the physical realm. As light, space, and time, it could be considered a form of the supernal triad, which generates the bubbles of the ruach, the prism of Thoth. Thoth being again that fourth, that disconnect, that weird quantum loop in a sense, the schism of all. The triad of Kether, light, Chakma, space, and Binah, time, extend indefinitely like the three dimensions. So the Ein Sof or limitless light, essentially. Which I was just also thinking about this earlier today, also, or yesterday. Or Aleph Vav Resh is AVR, which is like augmented virtual reality. So that's again consistent with the concept, the ancient teachings as well. So along with the three modes of past, present, future, and the three veils of light, Ein Sof, Or. The light is refracted at the prism of Thoth, where differentiation is made, and the white light divided into the seven main rays below the abyss. As the central, and so again, remember the white light is literally 111, Aleph, and the whole concept of the fall, and zero, and the time leap, and individuation, all that. As the central solar key which aligns Kether, Thoth, Tiferet, Yesod, and Malkuth, it is significant that the center of the people is aligned as 666, showing yet another connection with the people, window, or vortex, which is essentially the same as the will or reality tunnel, i.e. the window of the soul. So remember also retina, which they say the eye and the unique nature of it, blah, blah, blah. It's like a snowflake. And snowflakes, again, are hexagonal. So that just shows that essentially you would think it would just be like, I don't know. To me, it hints towards the hexahedral nature of space-time. But this photoreceptive part of the eye, this latter phrase is usually applied to the eyes, which connects also with the retina. The photoreceptive part of the eye and the soul symbol, which is the eye, but also refers to the light body. So the toroid. Note also that the theory of general relativity says that the distortion of space-time is dependent on the energy and momentum of whatever matter or radiation light is present. As space-time, energy, and matter, the quadrivium connects with the space-time spirit matter of Makashana, mentioned in Liber 418, and a blind for the word of the eon. Another formula of the great work. Ayin, Hebrew I, equates with ion, which means going. And so also, in a sense, Ion, the god, or whatever, in a sense, related to Mithra, related to Kronos also, though, related to Abraxas even, but also in the Jungian sense, the individuation also. So, remember how the nature of the gods is in their going, and what Crowley said in Magic Without Tears. Why is the Tao translated reason? Because by reason is here meant the structure of the mind itself. So again, the ratio and the rationale of the, this sort of just the magnetic balancing. A Buddhist who had succeeded with Mahasatipatthana might call it the consciousness of the tendency to perceive the sensation of anything. For in the last resort, and through the pursuit of one line of analysis, this structure is all that we can call our consciousness. Everything of which we can in any way be aware may be interpreted as being some function of this structure. Note, function. For now we see why Tao may also be translated the way, for it is the motion of the structure that we observe. There is no being apart from going. You are familiar with the 4 powers of the Sphinx, attributed to the adepts of the old time to their 4 elements. Air is to know, sire. Fire is to will, bele. Water is to dare, ader. And earth is to keep silence, taser. But now that a 5th element, spirit, is generally recognized in the Kabbalah, I have deemed it proper to add a 5th power corresponding to go, higher. See the Book of Thoth, page 275. Then, as spirit is the origin, the essence, and the sum of the other 4, so is to go in relation to those powers. And to go is the very meaning of the name God, as elsewhere shown in these letters. Hence, the Egyptian gods were signalized as such by their bearing the Ankh, which is a sandal strap, and in its form, the crux ansata, the rosy cross, which the means whereby we demonstrate the Godhead of our nature. See then how sweetly each idea slides into the next. How right this is, that the quintessence should be dynamic and not static. For if there were some form of being separate from going, it would necessarily be subject to decay, and in any case, a thing impossible to apprehend, since apprehension is itself an act, not an idea immobile which would be bound to change in the very moment of grasping it. As I have said, or as I have tried to show in another lecture, the point event, or whatever it is, of the pulse, of which we are aware, is a change, or less inaccurately, the memory of one. The things that change remain relentlessly unknown. Yeah, it's kind of, it's like both a miracle and awesome, but it's also like, what the fuck, So it's like golden fucking shit. The visible section of the electromagnetic spectrum is but a fraction of what is known. So obviously there's waves and data, all sorts of, at this point, probably like pollution, electrosmog and all that. Far more forces operate beyond the range of ocular vision. The 7 rays are the 7 vials, 107, as well as the 7 seals of the Bible, 666. So again, it makes me think of, the 6 circles and the 7th being the ShBA. Whereas Dark Doorway of the Beast is an expose on the mechanism of Thoth as the vetoing factor, the abyss, and what constitutes the various planes and spheres of emanation, the peephole of the present centers on the demarcation. So again, it has everything to do with the funnel effect concept, on the demarcation of frame rate thought, which is itself but a fragment of the whole, the celluloid nature of the mind. While we operate in the 3 dimensions of space, height, width, and depth, through the 4th dimension of time, so essentially going around a hidden angle, we not only glimpse but a frame at a time chronologically, but we have a ring past naught, which extends infinitely yet still remains disconnected from all other ego centers. Each ego is a peephole opening outward to the world, seeing but what falls within the lens of its perspective. And so again, not just the eyes. I personally think that even in study, I don't study them, but from what I hear of blind people, is that they still have a sense of rationality, a ratio essentially. And so there happens to be yet another book which I came across just after Peephole, titled Operations of the Other Mind by Edmund Shaftesbury, or Webster Edgerly, I guess was his real name, which discusses the role of the subconscious dark other side of the mind back of what is being viewed through the peephole. And so it obviously it makes me think of Liberty ShBA and the fact that there's in retrosity, this reflective nature, which mathematically, I kind of resisted and the acceptance of it, or even I didn't want to get into it. I was like, okay, I already got too much shit to deal with. But if you look at the nature of a number, and then you consider the relations of what it has, then you flip it backwards, and you look at the number, which would, for example, 715 would be seemingly completely unconnected to this number, to 517. But you'll end up finding that there is some sort of retrosity, essentially, as this one guy calls it. Not Jim Egan, but the guy he mentions. So let's see. Considering how 666 veils light, space, time, energy, and matter, the high and the low, the micro and macro, literally, lux and nox, it could well be said to represent the duality of the mind itself. And as it does, because it's Hafren, Buddhismos, but also, again, the cornerstone of the whole the tower or mountain. 666 is the light of the mind as well. Consciousness. So again, the electric nature of the mind, the optical nature as well. Note that consciousness is also 517. Remember that the consciousness owes, or like the eyes essentially, perception, and it's not cherry picking or confirmation bias when they're using the same gematria formula. And when a lot of these things just happen to, again, I'll notice it when I'm just randomly plugging in new things. I'm like, how does this? I have to really double check, triple check, and go over and over and see why does this happen? But it does. So yeah, when they're using the same gematria formula, which means the values are concrete and unchangeable. I'm not sitting here going, through all sorts of variations. Samuel Roth also says that space is consciousness, both being tenuous extensions of awareness. The reason it is difficult to discuss the contents of this book is because there are many avenues of thought that are hard to separate, as well as to recall where things are mentioned, so I cannot but urge the reader to obtain the book. And I've actually seen it for relatively cheap, $7, $12. But I will quote at length an intriguing section on what he says about space. I hope there's not cut-ups in the live stream, since I'm streaming this. Sure. Oh well, it's recording, so I was going to say, either way, I'll just upload it. When it begins to look as if there might be no precise way of measuring things at all, the relativist, who needs to be neither pure nor experimental, sheds new light on the matter by asking whether there is some absolute quantity in nature that we try to determine when we measure length. When we try to determine the number of molecules in a given piece of matter, he goes on, we have to use indirect methods. Indifferent methods may give systematically different results. But no one doubts that there is a definite number of molecules, so that there is some meaning in saying that there are certain methods are theoretically good and others inaccurate. Space being material, and measurement of it being practical only with things material, the only conclusion to be drawn from the argument of Eddington's relativist is that measurement can only determine the contents of space in such natural units as atoms and molecules. This is one of those truisms which have only to be presented to be thoroughly understood. Once you have it in mind, space steps out of the innocuous place assigned to it in its dimensional geometry, in which things are measured according to arbitrary divisions like inches and feet and along illusory even spaces such as squares and circles, and takes its place as that unseen formation of the world, which bulges out of the dimensional norms everywhere into extra-dimensional figures. So, all undiagrammable because they can neither be predicted by the mind nor reckoned out by any known method of calculation. And I would say that if it can be construed, that's not the real thing anyway. So if you think about it, the true, unbound, unconfined, unconstricted nature of, present thought, essentially, creative thought, visionary thought, is more real than the secondary simulacra that we can do with it. Obviously, that's creativity, but I think we, again, take for granted and second guess the value of the impulse, the creative impulse, the will. Physical space is the basic material of the world, but since the word space can never mean anything more to us than a container, we had better think of it in terms of its granular nature, which is consciousness. Look around you. Everything that you perceive, tables, chairs, plants, fruit, typewriter, inkwell, occupies space. But what kind of space? To be able adequately to answer this question, you must determine in advance the nature of those things that occupy space. And so again, going back to the last video and what I was trying to mention with the VR, is that essentially we could be like fish in an aquarium, in a medium, undisturbed, but yet there could be another dimension, moving, operating around it. And that's essentially what frequencies and fields indicate when they can superimpose, quantum superimposition. We know that they are made of a very porous matter of which science knows nothing, and about which philosophy still conjectures vaguely. But as things of matter, but as things of matter, they share one characteristic whose nature is no longer open to doubt. That is, their tendency always, under all conditions, either to expand or contract. As in expanding, objects take up more space, and in contracting they take up less. How can they possibly fit into a precise, unchanging dimensional portion of space? Space is extra-dimensional because the objects which occupy it are extra-dimensional. Makes me think like I'm literally seeing a Menger sponge in my mind, just opening. To go forward with space as the world slips slyly out of its dimensional norms into its extra-dimensional future, we must first visit a little behind the lines where the reader is asking a very important question. If you accept a limit to space, and you do when you approve the hypothesis that it is all there is of the world, what exists beyond it? The answer is that beyond space there is nothing. But what is nothing? Presses the reader. May it not be some wonderful substance or force out of which worlds, even superior to ours, may grow? So the reader is right again on both counts. Conceptual nothing is only another word for something. Again, it's magnetic background radiation. A basis for understanding the true nature of nothingness was laid down by Hegel in the suggestion that being and non-being are inalienable folds to each other, like an object and its shadow. There you have it then, the world entity, space nothing, which P.A. Campbell describes as the Siamese twins of relativity. No knife can cut and have either twin still alive. In the form of dualism which bolsters up the fundamental unity of the world, leaving it an indivisible being, non-being, or space nothingness monoduality. To destroy both of them by putting an end to either one would still leave everything in perfect order. For the destruction of nothingness or non-being would simply yield being or space again, according to which operation has been put into effect. Following out this new definition, space and nothingness become each other's alter ego. The world is revealed as a Janus head with two faces, a coin of which the head side is space and the tail side non-space or nothingness. Matter, electrical and radiational, is then no more than a mode of spatial being. Far from being mathematically stereotyped or frozen as Euclid would have it, matter is the breeding ground of all known phenomena. Pry out the structure, the elusive ramifications of this being-non-being, space-nothingness concatenation of forms, and you have attained a full view of the world. Presumably, space has a finely grained skeleton, every one of whose limbs is a space-nothingness structure of particles composed of consciousness, the stuff scientists will someday discover inside of protons and neutrons. Each limb is a unit of energy, and they all tend to adapt themselves formatively with respect to one another as best they can, and so make up organically the system of extension we think of as dimensional space. In this way, they perform their parts for themselves separately, and for the realm of space as a whole. Every unit of the spatial skeleton is of its own self an infinitesimal world in which the space factor and the nothingness factor are engaged in a timeless struggle for self-perpetuity. In this struggle, each emerges victoriously only because of the extraordinary failure of either of them to win. They clash in and out of the forms, so this is again Shiva and Shakti, or whatever, the yin and yang, whatever you want to call it. Magnetism, which Campbell calls norms of space, every single rational unit prepared to sacrifice its individual interests to those of the local field of space in which it functions. In that way, the whole space system is tied together in an inextricable system of being and non-being phases. But while space is extra-dimensional, the things which grow out of it do so in norms strictly dimensional, and conform to the intellectual and physical grasp of the human sensory system. The immediate results, unnoticed by us until a new norm has come about, and therefore abnormal, and are properly so described when related to our processes of cognition. So remember, cognition is 666. This and so many complicated, literally, like I'm gonna show if I haven't already in post 45, I think, more schematics for systems that clearly, like, there's just, I don't know. This extra-dimensional abnormality is then the norm of the realm of space as a whole, the space of being non-being. But in the realm recognizable by our senses, which Plato wrote that it geometrizes, all additions to matter issue forth in strictly dimensional norms. The realm our senses recognize is a somewhat loose-jointed infinite solid which changes its forms in a dynamic mutational manner that accords with the strict necessities imposed upon it by the organic parts of its inner structure. Because of the purely inward nature or urge of this necessity, the whole cosmos in the world of its inclusive phenomena came into being, and continues to recur infinitely through a strictly limited space. The phenomenal flux of what we call matter, electricity, and radiation may be described as a parade of caught-up manifestations of space. So, the Vishvarupa of Vishnu is Seshanaga. Endlessness, should I even try it? Seshanaga is the Vishvarupa of Vishnu. Endlessness, the paradoxical attribute of space, is something of an assurance to us that the condition of phenomenal flux is not a thing of yesterday, today, or tomorrow only, but of the ever-present now. So again, and then the whole Liber 150 comes to mind, 150 being infinite, and just the fact that that's what the Om is. It's this infinite, unspeakable word, because it's the word, the word, the logos. It is in this paradox, perhaps, that scientists will someday discover the source of the one inalienably unique element of space. For the changes which take place in it frame no mere history of repetitions. Aside from the fact that nothing of a repetitive nature could be awaited each time with such breathless excitement, there is also the contributing factor that the events in space undergo a perpetual and unlimited redistribution throughout the entire realm. This perpetual reconditioning of space's extra-dimensional condition is the sum and substance of phenomenal nature. It has produced the phenomenal microcosmos, and the microcosmos in man himself. This makes me think of this whole, I don't know if I should even bring it up, because I don't know if it's going to work without me having to disable everything. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. I think it's this one. Kenneth Grant mentions this formula, actually 1592, being one more than like Pneuma Zoes, which is like spirit of life or life force. Maybe it wasn't this one. I don't remember. Never mind. It's just this concept that Kenneth Grant clearly knew about. I'm not going to get into it though, because I'll have to just dig around. But anyway, the microcosm, basically this whole like ocean, it brings up the Avatamsaka Sutra really in my mind. This infinite ocean that is fractal and somehow like fuels the Hiranya, the flower of, life. Let's see. This book, A New Light on the Renaissance. It's such a weird web. Like way back when I was mentioning, I don't even know what post it was, but I think 50, The Key of It All, and the Progradior correspondence books, where he apparently knew about Harold Bayley and mentioned him and had an interest in Francis Bacon. And that all came up like while I was already getting into it. But then this other book I wanted to really associate more in this post because it kind of goes directly into this concept of the people, the celluloid dream, the people of the present, is The Ancient Secret by Flavia Anderson, which I mentioned as far back as 52 and 53. But it's so hard to go through this book too, which should also have a PDF available. And there's so much lore and folk history, which is all good because again it shows the recurrence of some of these things. But the general point of it essentially is that there's a science that we've slowly discovered about applying light to various minerals or substances, whether it's glass, crystal, just mirrors even, and that the development of that, Candlemas, the Urim and Thummim, all this stuff is all similar. It's like the mythology is just repeating historically, cyclically. But what this book actually talks about is that the fleur de lis And if you go to the Rosicrucians of Hargrave Jennings, which A.E. Waite, Arthur Waite, didn't really like, I guess, in his true history of the Rosicrucians. But I think that you just kind of got to look at it all, not obviously accept too much craziness. That's coming from me, but because obviously that's the thing. Some people do apply like too much things where it doesn't really apply. But the fleur de lis, he associates with the fire of the soul and the lamp of the hermit, essentially. I'm trying to find it, but yeah, this fleur de lis, the flower of life, it goes a lot into this. This book's just so confusing because it's got a lot. Same with The Lost Language of Symbolism by him. He actually references Crowley like twice. And there's a lot to this. There's a lot of printer's marks or brands, as he calls them. But the flower of, or the fleur de lis, and the whole teaching of what that represents and how it recurs, Secret of the Golden Flower, which I've mentioned and knew about, but I just didn't link till recently with all this. I should bring this up too. The Psychology of C.G. Jung by Jolande Jacobi. It's like a pretty small book, but I'm glad I found it, I guess. Like, if I had found it a long time ago, it may have helped, but the psychic cone that he uses as this diagram here throughout it. There's a lot of different diagrams he goes through. They're all kind of relevant. There's many mental maps. But the psychic cone and the nature of this, like, opening nature, apparently, which I found paralleled in this book, another Jungian psychologist guy. But this book it's dense. It's very dense, so it's hard to pull anything straight out of it. But I know it's called The Living Symbol. He talks about all these dreams different people had, and there's pictures in it somewhere. I have the physical book, so it's hard to find here. But he even goes, he shows how the mind, the psyche, really is a mandala that isn't just, stuck. It's a moving mandala, and that it is also the Mahamudra mandala, because it's subject and object, or like this people of the present, Samuel Roth was saying, it's essentially a mirror, but in the abyss. But yeah, this book is just deep. I just brought it up because I've been trying to get into it, crack it open. This book is just a good summary, or if you want an intro. It looks complicated, but you just have to start out from the beginning. But I was like, holy shit, there's so much to this. In linking it with this whole concept of just time in the mind. That's why I have this pulled up also, as I may have mentioned it before. I know I do, at least eventually. In some other post, but Vannevar Bush, I think his name was, Vannevar. He kind of created, I don't know if you could say it, the first computer or what, because that's what it looks like. It looks like a desktop computer. But they don't say it, because maybe someone else did. Concept Memex influenced the development of hypertext systems, personal knowledge-based software. So yeah, essentially, memory index, and it was essentially like the prototype of LifeLog, now DARPA or Facebook or whatever. Now they have ubiquitous, decentralized, I don't remember all the academic publication names, but smartphones can be used for essentially the same thing. And, I do this on my own with my database, but it would also, this is far more complex with Tyler Technologies level stuff. And obviously, I've been just studying, what are the capabilities? How far does this go? they can essentially record the data, like Michael Persinger said. Not only that, like, it's just these optical systems over time, direct electrical stimulation and electrocorticographic brain-computer interfaces, enabling technologies for input to Cortex. That sounds just, wonderful. Synthetic psychological environments refers to the representation or modeling of influences to individuals and groups as a result of culture. The Human Terrain Project, virtual family and population, digital computational phantoms I mentioned in the last post. Well, apparently this has been going on for a while, like at least I already knew the 2020 web vision went to 2001, but 2003, 2004, when they really ramped up, everything. Synthetic Environment for Analysis and Simulations, or SEAS, is currently being used by Homeland Security and the U.S. Defense Department to simulate crises on the U.S. mainland. SEAS enables researchers and organizations to try out their models or techniques in a publicly known, realistically detailed environment. It is now capable of running real-time simulations for up to 62 nations, including Iraq, Afghanistan, and China. The simulations gobble up breaking news, census data, economic indicators, and climactic events in the real world, along with proprietary information such as military intelligence. The Iraq and Afghanistan computer models are the most highly developed and complex of the 62 available of JFCOM J9. Each has about 5 million individual nodes representing things such as hospitals, mosques, pipelines, and people. And it's just funny because, they've got all this wonderful stuff. They've got all the data, but yet it's never there when you need it. They're never there when you need it. But SEAS was developed to help Fortune 500 companies with strategic planning. Yeah, because they're going to need that. Because this isn't all just designed. Then it was used to help recruiting commanders to strategize ways to improve recruiting potential soldiers. Do I have the OneWeb satellites pulled up? I don't know. But OneWeb, they were going to go out of business. Now they're going to get 48,000, or they're putting in a thing for 48,000 satellites. So yeah, the Sentient World Simulation. Again, going back to Digital Earth. I'm just going to go through this. You can look it up on your own. The simulation. It's not that the whole concept, we're living in a simulation now, but that it is an optical, mega simulation, I don't know, maybe on some level. If you read The Lost Continent, which is going to be published here soon, on my other channel, I don't know if he's talking about the Atlanteans as elementals, because that's what it seems like, or I don't know. It's too complex to get into, but who knows what we're in and what's above and below. I found this, and I had mentioned all these other things, but I found this later on after the last video when looking for more stuff about 2020, but even further back, and this is from 2003. It was actually apparently commissioned, and then it got published, and commissioned in 2001, and then published in 2003. And I know it's actually it's more England-based, but there's some important stuff in here projecting specifically to this region of August through December of 2020. Actually, let me find it. It's in spider chart. Situation August 20, situation December 20, blue, red, terrain, climate, weather, tempo, ROE, but all this stuff, local politics, economics, culture, this whole urban, this is apparently one document of another, the land operations in year 2020, and then this is urban. And it's generally pretty general, but it's very telling, like it's very spot on. I just thought I'd put that out there. So it's like you never hear. Why do I not hear anyone else talk about, like, I don't know. So I have to just look into it myself and see if, I mean, it's not like it's going to do anything, but just so if anyone's listening, you want to read about how they planned for something to happen in 2020, yet again, add it to the list. But yeah, this whole 5G, like, I'm not saying that coronavirus is caused by 5G or even has necessarily a link. There may be, not physically, but there may be at the higher levels of planning and, but International Mobile Telecommunications 2020 standard are the requirements issued by the ITU radio communication sector of the International Telecommunication Union in 2015 for 5G networks, devices, and services. The standard is expected to be completed in 2020, but parts of it have been finalized earlier. For example, the requirements for radio access technologies listed below were adopted in 2017. Blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I'm just saying that I sensed that an internet was being, like the internet, and that just things in general are being upgraded. And there's all these blackout. I sense that there's going to be possibly a long-term, like a major blackout, and then a new internet entirely. There's all these, like, college kids that really, like, I've been watching it, just that it's hard not to just want to say things, but a lot of people, the younger generation is now they're pissed at the older generation, and they want to basically update everything and come in with something new, and unfortunately they're going to swindle a lot of people, as they always do, but just letting you know. Defense Department wants to perform real-time biometric identification through walls. Obviously, that's essentially what they can more easily do. They can already do that essentially, with if there's certain fields present. I know it's such a stretch of the understanding, especially when you don't do any research. Yeah, so they talk about all this. I don't know why it's not loading. I made sure it was there. Can you at least close? I guess I'll get some coffee then. The future battlefield. Battlefield is 111. Beth Aleph Teth Teth Lamed Hey Vav Yad Hey Lamed Daleth. Which is just funny because 111, it's NSA, it's a lot to do with electromagnetic fields, essentially. Army Marines prepare for massive fight in megacities, 2018. It's just like, how does no one have any sort of contextual basis to put all this stuff together to realize, like, it's, what it is? Assured security, dynamic engagement, NATO 2020, May 2010. Yeah, I mean, it should be, so again, 1616, Rosicrucians, 1717, Freemasons, 1818, Satanism, spiritualism with the Mysterium Baphometus, devil worship, Dictionary Infernal, Frankenstein, I think, or the New Prometheus. All that to me represents just like breaking out of the old trends. But then 1919, Crowley came along and really like sort of updated it. Now it's 2020, soon to be 2025, soon to be 2045, soon to be 20. If we can make it, let's see. Hopefully we can make it without like uploading our brains and getting, fucked up with whatever that causes. Connect 2020 agenda. This connects to this whole China thing, which apparently there's like a healthy China 2020 from 2009. China wants to come out on top above America by 2020. China may attack India, apparently, according to some news article from like 2013. And people are saying that obviously that's kind of telling, since they apparently are. They're like fighting with them right now. So I'm pulling this up just because it's ironic, like how much this search function is useful, but it doesn't seem very used here in this peephole of the freaking present, China 2020. China. The rapid pace and grand scale of China's rise have produced a heady mixture of wonder and consternation in the West. Is China on track to become a superpower? Are they not already? What would that mean for the rest of the world? China in 2020 presents a native Chinese perspective on the challenges and blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see. Yeah, that's the whole thing, the healthy China, like with their flood and I don't know if the dam broke yet. I don't think it has, but, let's see how this turns out. This whole 2045, they're like really trying to plan for the fact that like the individual can have too much power, more power than it took all them to, spend their whole life and waste all their money to achieve. Freaking Forbes. No, I'm not going to turn it off. What was this? China to be number 1, US to be number 2. That's pretty much all you need to know. It's not worth the money. The revolt of the masses. This, like, the quotes from this are so telling for today. It's like nothing has changed. Everything in the world is strange and marvelous to well-open eyes. This faculty of wonder is the one which leads the intellectual man through life in the perpetual ecstasy of the visionary. The mass is all that which sets no value on itself, good or ill, based on specific grounds, but which feels itself just like everybody, and nevertheless is not concerned about it. Is, in fact, quite happy to feel itself as one with everybody else. The select man is not the petulant person who thinks himself superior to the rest, but the man who demands more of himself than the rest. The most radical division that is possible to make of humanity is that which splits it into 2 classes of creatures: those who make great demands on themselves, piling up difficulties and duties, and those who demand nothing special of themselves, but for whom to live is to be every moment what they already are, without imposing on themselves any effort towards perfection, mere buoys that float on the waves. So this identification over-identification with the external can become plethotic. The division of society into masses and select minorities is, then, not a division into social classes, but into classes of men, and cannot coincide with the hierarchic separation of upper and lower classes. It is, of course, plain that in these upper classes, when and as long as they really are so, there is much more likelihood of finding men who adopt the great vehicle, whereas the lower classes normally comprise individuals of minus quality. But, strictly speaking, within both of these social classes there are to be found mass and genuine minority. A characteristic of our times is the predominance, even in groups traditionally selective, of the mass and the vulgar. Thus, in the intellectual life, which of its essence requires and presupposes qualification, one can note the progressive triumph of the pseudo-intellectual unqualifiable, and by their very mental texture disqualified. Similarly, in the surviving groups of the nobility, male and female. On the other hand, it is not rare to find today amongst working men who before might be taken as the best example of what we are calling mass, nobly disciplined minds. There exist, then, in society operations, activities, and functions of the most diverse order, which are of their very nature special, and which consequently cannot be properly carried out with special gifts. For example, certain pleasures of an artistic and refined character, or again the functions of government and of political judgment in public affairs. Previously, these special activities were exercised by qualified minorities, or at least by those who claimed such qualification. The mass asserted no right to intervene in them. They realized if they wished to intervene, they would necessarily have to acquire those special qualities and cease being mere mass. Today we are witnessing the triumph of a hyper-democracy, in which the mass acts directly, outside the law, imposing its aspirations and its desires by means of material pressure. The present writer, when he takes his pen in hand to treat a subject which he has studied deeply, has to bear in mind that the average reader who has never concerned himself with this subject, if he reads, does so with the view not of learning something from the writer, but rather of pronouncing judgment on him when he is not in agreement with the commonplaces that the said reader carries in his head. YouTube in a nutshell. The internet in a nutshell. If the individuals who make up the mass believed themselves specially qualified, it would be a case merely of personal error, not of sociological subversion. The characteristic of the hour is that the commonplace mind, knowing itself to be commonplace, has the assurance to proclaim the rights of the commonplace and to impose them wherever it will. The mass crushes beneath it everything that is different, everything that is excellent, individual, qualified, and select. Anybody who is not like everybody, who does not think like everybody, runs the risk of being eliminated. The average type of European at present possesses a soul healthier and stronger, it is true than those of the last century, but more simple. Hence, at times he leaves the impression of a primitive man suddenly risen in the midst of a very old civilization. In the schools, which were such a source of pride in the last century, it has been impossible to do more than instruct the masses in the technique of modern life. It has been found impossible to educate them. They have been hurriedly inoculated with the pride and power of modern instruments, but not with their spirit. There are few men who doubt that motor cars will in 5 years be more comfortable and cheaper than today. They believe in this as they believe the sun will rise in the morning. The metaphor is an exact one. For, in fact, the common man, finding himself in a world so excellent, technically and socially, believes that it has been produced by nature and never thinks of the personal efforts of highly endowed individuals which the creation of this new world presupposed. Still less will he admit the notion that all these faculties still require the support of certain difficult virtues, the least failure of which would cause the rapid disappearance of the whole magnificent edifice. That man is intellectually of the mass who, in the face of any problem, is satisfied with thinking the first thing he finds in his head. On the contrary, the excellent man is he who condemns what he finds in his mind without previous effort, and only accepts as worthy of him what is still farther above him and what requires a further effort in order to be reached. For me, then, nobility is synonymous with a life of effort, ever set on excelling oneself, in passing beyond what is to what one sets up as a duty and an obligation. In this way, the noble life stands opposed to the common or inert life, which reclines statically upon itself, condemned to perpetual immobility. And this is what I keep seeing with everything. Like, everyone's waiting to be led around with the next talking point or idea or bullshit to come from whether it's Hollywood or whoever. It's like, just do things on, like, go and do. Unless an external force compels it to come out of itself. Hence we apply the term mass to this kind of man, not so much because of his multitude as because of his inertia. As one advances in life, one realizes more and more that the majority of men and of women are incapable of any other effort than that strictly imposed on them as a reaction to external compulsion. And for that reason, the few individuals we have come across who are capable of spontaneous and joyous efforts stand out isolated, monumentalized, so to speak, in our experience. These are the select men, the nobles, the only ones who are active and not merely reactive, for whom life is a perpetual striving, an incessant course of training. The individual finds himself already with a stock of ideas. He decides to content himself with them and to consider himself intellectually complete. As he feels the lack of nothing outside himself, he settles down definitely amid his mental furniture. Such is the mechanism of self-obliteration. See, and the reason I'm reading this is because it's almost like these things almost sound like if you were to read this in a nice, like, where everything's just peachy and no problems to be seen everywhere you look, you'd almost be like, oh, this is like negative. Like, what's he talking about? Everything's fine. But you can tell now, like, you can sense that this seeming, what is it? Like, wrong. It's almost wrong. Like, you'd be like, no, he's wrong. But no, he's right. He's in a wrong world, in a sense. Like, try presenting a problem to someone who, like, is screaming for a solution. Chances are they would rather continue screaming. Like, it's like addiction in a sense. It's mental. The mental, the mind is fragile and the whole psyche needs something to do. Yeah, absolutely. The man of sense is constantly catching himself within an inch of being a fool, hence he makes an effort to escape from the imminent folly, and in that effort lies his intelligence. The fool, on the other hand, does not suspect himself. He thinks himself the most prudent of men, hence the enviable tranquillity with which the fool settles down installs himself with his own folly. There is no way of dislodging the fool from his folly, to take him away for a while from his blind state, and to force him to contrast his own dull vision with other keener forms of sight. The fool is a fool for life. He is devoid of pores. So again, that's like one of the big keys I keep seeing is just force yourself to do uncomfortable things, I guess, so it's always something new. The mass man accepts the stock of common, and they want us all locked up, not going anywhere, just living through the internet. It's like, well, I'm already ahead of the game with that one. The mass man accepts the stock of commonplaces, prejudices, fag ends, or ideas of simply empty words which chance has piled within his mind, and with a boldness only explicable by his ingenuousness, is prepared to impose them everywhere. It is painful to hear relatively cultured people speak concerning the most elementary problems of the day. They seem like rough farmhands trying with thick, clumsy fingers to pick up a needle lying on the table. When by 1890 a third generation assumes intellectual command in Europe, we meet with a type of scientist unparalleled in history. He is one who, out of all that has to be known in order to be a man of judgment, is only acquainted with one science, and even of that one only knows the small corner in which he is an active investigator. He even proclaims it as a virtue that he takes no cognizance of what lies outside the narrow territory specially cultivated by himself, and gives the name of dilettantism to any curiosity for the general scheme of knowledge. Experimental science has progressed thanks in great part to the work of men astoundingly mediocre. To obtain quite abundant results is not even necessary to have rigorous notions of their meaning and foundations. Previously, men could be divided into the learned and the unlearned, but your specialist cannot be brought under either of these categories. We shall have to say that he is a learned ignoramus, which is a very serious matter, as it implies that he is a person who is ignorant, not in the fashion of an ignorant man, but with all the petulance of one who is learned. So I tried not to laugh. To me, reading these, it's almost like something you would want to say to your teacher, your parent, or just or on the internet publicly. This is the greatest danger that today threatens civilization: state intervention. The majority of men have no opinions, and these have to be pumped into them from outside, like lubricants into machinery. That's very much like the lost continent causes me to think of Zero and all the work there. This degradation is nothing else than the acceptance as a normal, constituted condition of an irregularity, of something which, though accepted, is still regarded as not right, as it is impossible to change into healthy normality what is of its essence unhealthy and abnormal. The individual decides to adapt himself to the thing that is wrong, making himself part of the crime of irregularity. It is a mechanism similar to that indicated by the popular saying, "One lie make 100." The apparent egoism of great nations and great men is the inevitable sternness with which anyone who has his life fixed on some undertaking must bear himself. When we are really going to do something and have dedicated ourselves to a purpose, we cannot be expected to be ready at hand to look after every passerby and to lend ourselves to every chance display of altruism. A creative life implies a regime of strict mental health, of high conduct, constant stimulus, which keep active the consciousness of man's dignity. A creative life is an energetic life, and this is only possible in one of the other of these two situations, either being the one who rules or finding oneself placed in the world which is ruled by someone in whom we recognize full right to such a function. Either I rule or I obey. By obedience, I do not mean mere submission. This is degradation. But, on the contrary, respect for the ruler and acceptance of his leadership, solidarity with him, and enthusiastic enrollment under his banner. Take stock of those around you, and you will see them wandering about lost through life, like sleepwalkers in the midst of their good or evil fortune, without the slightest suspicion of what is happening to them. You will hear them talk in precise terms about themselves and their surroundings, which would seem to point to them having ideas on the matter. But start to analyze those ideas and you will find they hardly reflect in any way the reality to which they appear to refer. And if you go deeper, you will discover there is not even an attempt to adjust the ideas to this reality. Quite the contrary. Through these notions, the individual is trying to cut off any personal vision of reality, of his own very life. For life is at the start a chaos in which one is lost. The individual suspects this, but he is frightened at finding himself face to face with this terrible reality, and tries to cover it over with a curtain of fantasy where everything is clear. It does not worry him that his ideas are not true. He uses them as trenches for the defense of his existence, as scarecrows to frighten away reality. The man with the clear head is the man who frees himself from these fantastic ideas and looks life in the face, realizes that everything in it is problematic, and feels himself lost. This is the simple truth, that to live is to feel oneself lost. He who accepts it has already begun to find himself, to be on firm ground. Instinctively, as do the shipwrecked, he will look round for something to which to cling, because it is a question of his salvation, will cause him to bring him order into the chaos of his life. These are the only genuine ideas, the ideas of the shipwrecked. All the rest is rhetoric, posturing farce. He who does not really feel himself lost is lost without remission. That is to say, he never finds himself, never comes up against his own reality. The majority of men of science who given themselves to it through fear of facing life, they are not clear heads, hence their notorious ineptitude in the presence of any concrete situation. Yeah, it's like we're all just trying to patch over and paint over problems and things, and then we wonder why they're, seeping through other places that we focus mostly on our ignorance. And I'm saying this myself. I mean, obviously, like, I know this from I have to tell myself this when I'm driving or when I'm dealing with anger or whatever, depression. Our scientific ideas are of value to the degree to which we have felt ourselves lost before a question, have seen its problematic nature, and have realized that we cannot find support in received notions, in prescriptions, proverbs, and mere words. The man who discovers a new scientific truth has previously had to smash atoms almost everything he had learned, or smash to atoms almost everything he had learned, and arrives at the new truth with hands bloodstained from the slaughter of 1,000 platitudes. So yeah, I wanted to read that because it's just necessary, I feel like all this is necessary, like, even though it's insignificant, I feel like it's somehow just like, oh, well, at least it's a little block in their little chain. Another block in your chain. You want a little block in your chain, bitch? I really don't want to read all this, but it is relevant too. The Impact of Science on Society by Bertrand Russell. Like, it's like certain things in particular, especially, but I don't know. I just think that it's weird. So many. There's such the mass is so willing to just follow suit and eat up whatever they're given, follow whatever carrots dangled. And you'd like expect more, I guess, but I don't know. It's like I'm not surprised that this is happening. That every day people are stuck in the news loop, and no one can learn from history. Like, it's like, I didn't want that to be the message. It's really not the only message. The message to me is just, I see in my mind's eye, like in studying this over the last few days and weeks, linking really ultimately from previous things, like, I see way beyond the people of the present. I see, I don't know. I knew that there was something to my initial thoughts. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta study light. I gotta study space. I gotta study time. And then these books just like fell into all of it's just, I don't know. It's weird. Oh yeah, he says space and consciousness are essentially the same thing, and you add them together, it's 666. The fractal expansion of luminous space. The veto of Thoth is there to balance the brilliance of infinity, and thus the schism of the fall of the abyss, which creates the illusion of light and shadow, fleshes out into materialization according to the will or charge of the cells, shells, or souls, which are separated like sparks or embers from the central source flame. The circuit of electrical power is eternal, although its main dual functions of active and passive appear to be transitory, eternally changing, going. Note that the duality of going and still is also 666. So again, the whole samsara, nirvana equivalence, or in another way, still going. Since magic is said to be associated with Odd, or the Odic Force 11, and Thoth by Crowley and Grant the Egg 11, is therefore an apt symbol of the transformative alchemical vessel of space-time, spirit, and matter, and being also the totem of Lamb the Way 107, and the window of the final hay, we can see that the interplay of dimensions through time is working out of the tetragrammatonic formula. See, I'm gotta prepare my mind for these words sometimes. Tetragrammatonic formula, with Maat as the daughter aspect representing the double wand of power, balancing the triple formation of Isis, Osiris, and Horus Set, or Rahu Twi, or space-time light and shadow. Maat would thus be Malkuth, matter, in time, the fallen daughter, which is the reflection in illusory form, the essence of the preceding three. Lamb is the magus of the Aeon of Maat. If you read outside the circles of time, essentially that's what there's some person they refer to as the magus, and they associate it with Lamb, crowned and conquering, almost resembling a light bulb, because as a real hologram, his electrical center is at the region of Bindu Sahasrara, and as an idealized self-portrait of Crowley, it could be said to be yet another form of his incarnational avatars, albeit rayed back to him as a future memory. So again, in the continuum, in a sense, if we're all one, I don't know, I've had a sense that there's something above us, and that's why I'm interested, and that's why it's interesting to find out. Even the Rosicrucians say that there's essentially another stage of evolution. I wouldn't doubt if it's essentially I don't know. According to Buddhism, there's similar things. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not even gonna try to speculate. I just love. I like, I guess, speculating, but contemplating this stuff and wondering, clearly there's something going on here. I guess we'll have to wait and see in 2025 the externalization of the hierarchy. If they come down and show us. I'm just kidding, but who knows? We can only hope. Note, Crowley's Lamb vision is 666. Lamb the Way is 107. And then also LM the Way, Lamed Mem Final, is also 666. And Sketch, so implying the sketch of Lamb. And also the Grays in Simple Gematria. Could this refer to the gray alien future self of Crowley? Because the gray alien is 333 and future self. I don't know. To me, it's just ironic in that Lamb gives me this feeling that essentially I think of quantum computing and spider symbolism. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing. Can't really put it into words. I've tried. Continue to try, but I think it's a little deeper than just one thing or another. In a sense, I think, I don't know. There's definitely multiple levels and layers to all this. The importance of the book being only briefly touched upon, and from my own particular angle, as that is a valuable consideration in regards to the Maotian Gnosis, as has been worked upon throughout this publication, as it gives an interesting glimpse into a unique thought working indicating that just in the way that the visible spectrum is not all we know, they are to be operating in the various dimensional field planes of the electromagnetic spectrum. There is likely also to be various other phases of both the passage of time, not merely just the movement of objects, but as virtually limitless plethora of potential variations of movement of objects, i.e. parallel multiverses, which another concept apparently in the Tibetan cosmology, as well as potential room for advancement in understanding these matters if but the will to widen the lens is there. The lens, 555. Of course, so just again, all of it pretty much, satellite lenses, the lens of the funnel effect, the mind, whatever. Of course, this is precisely what is claimed by those working on these matters at CERN, albeit without the Kabbalistic knowledge which would lend great insight if they could but understand it. they're going about it merely externally rather than also internally. Which now, I mean, I don't know what they know, but it doesn't seem like they know too much of the Kabbalistic. Like, it seems like they know just enough to kind of tinker with like symbolism, but not enough to really make it seem like they know what they're doing in any elaborate manner. Widening the view of the world without widening the understanding of the mind, however, will have its consequences, and it is for the inner work to be but pointed to and left for those who will to do it when they are ready. So, and yeah, that's the whole point. You know, can't really tell anyone, like, even this stuff, it's like self-revealed knowledge, if you want to call it that. The Vision and the Voice by the Sync Book Press. Like, I feel like this is so important, but I don't know why it's not on YouTube.
That's what's happening to us. It is to break down
the copyright. But yeah, it just goes to show, like, all this stuff is like, each society is reflecting the human psyche back to itself. It's what it looks like. And the post-human implications of a lot of this stuff, it's the nature of really what more of these posts get into. But again, like, for whatever reason, we're forgetting the active impulse, the will, the heart, the mind, and it's, you know, the heart and the mind fusion, which it seems like we're being led astray. I say we, like, I mean, not everyone. It's not like even the people who are always are. But to some degree, that's what this whole hidden hyperspace kingdom thing is all about. It's like, clearly they want to induct people into this new form of, you know, just an updated form of the same bullshit that you'd think we would really have learned from. The people of the present's like just going to get a little more narrow. And that's the irony. You'd think, like, okay, that's why I don't trust the sentiment or the sincerity of the people who claim this is all for the good and for the better. Like, trust me, I love knowledge. I love the internet. I love technology. I love advancement. It's the psychological implications, though, of the fact that we rationalize and we ignore and we, again, like, just, I don't know, some imbalance, a lot of imbalances. It's hard to address. And when you do address them, you're the problem. Try to provide solutions, you're the problem. But not that, I mean, it's not like I think this is all a solution. There is no solution. The solution is that it's all, like, again, it's all going. But clearly there's something that the sankharas, if you want to call them that, patterns, the tendencies, there's something to be said for that. And we definitely need to create new patterns. And the concept of the celluloid dream, like, obviously there's the AFIs on this celluloid dream, but to me, it's like, I don't know, it says so much. The dark doorway of the beast, and realizing the fact the mind operates much faster than the physical translation. It's easier, at least for me, like, it's easier for me to think about what I want to say than to actually say it, and that lag alone prevents me from being able to translate my thoughts into words, or, you know, to express myself. And that's why I kind of do this, I guess, to try to let it vent out all this compressed air, all this hot air, all this bullshit that means absolutely nothing and shouldn't be of any value and isn't. It's absolutely of no value. it's only, like, I don't know, it's just something for me to look at. This whole concept of Nara, though, Seshanaga, Narayana, how Nara is just a man, even. It's like just a regular person. It's one of the translations. Or a woman, man or a person. So that goes to show this whole concept of the waters coming back and then being the waters of life. In 252, John Dee, which I've talked about before, but John Dee really was into 252. And then this guy, Jimmy again, I think? What's his name? Well, I don't remember the guy who talks about retrosity. I should know. It's just too much to remember. Bob Marshall, that's his name. He's got a lot of interesting stuff throughout all this, but the 252, I remember reading about how 252 and then 2520 are related, and then it even comes up in like an old text. It's funny because like talking about each individual number 1 through 1,000 is complex and quite a lot to consider. And then 2000, getting into the 2000s, it's a lot. And getting into 2520, and then D had this whole like gigantic number with its properties, like the Templar secret. That reminds me, exemplar, but the Templar secret is 666. Like it's just some weird overlap. But yeah, this 252, 2520. How can I really get into this right now? My head's like fried from all this. I'll probably get into it in the next post because I want to read. It's called Sundial of the Psyche. I want to read something from this book called The Computation of 666, which is kind of weird. Like it's like a Christian, I think, for the most part, take, but it goes through some really deep stuff I haven't seen anywhere else, and I finally actually got the book. It's like weird how these books come to me. 2520 doubled is 5040, which apparently Plato says is a convenient number to use for dividing many things, including both the citizens and the land of a city-state or polis into lesser parts, making it an ideal number for the number of citizens, heads, or families making up a polis. And 505 is interesting. Anyway, before I go off onto like random number things, yeah, I keep talking about this database, and I need to make a website for it. It's just that all this stuff is flooding. I'm having to go through Dharanis and all the sutras and samhitas, and, everything, manuals, documents. Yeah, this book. There's some like interesting stuff. Like the whole freaking thing is interesting, just with all the data. It mentions anacalypsis, Gerald Massey, some of the usual stuff, but it goes into even more though, especially going into the full Kabbalah of 9 chambers, and then how it seems to go into deeper stuff about the axle of time, or the hyperdimensional, interdimensional, whatever you want to call it. The fact that the 3 dimensions don't fully give insight, and so somehow the Kabbalah and stuff actually does. Like it implies and is leading towards, and was apparently, if you study the background of all this, towards a sort of way deeper system. Oh, and in Johnny Mnemonic, if you type in the phone number of the person or his agent or whatever from the beginning, the phone number pulls up an application number for a patent, which linked with all the other patents it's related to, based on and whatnot, integrated with. It's like everything about Johnny Mnemonic, system and method for monitoring and control of appliances. So again, the whole Internet of Things. system and method, or system for monitoring and controlling remote programmable device, energy management system and method. And again, like, just look up Elon Musk's patents and the ones that even just mention him and his patents. They're all about this controlling moving. Like, if you watch the movie, he enters these digital worlds essentially. Well, does at least one or two times. But yeah, I just found all this, interesting with what's happening. The fact that our little peepholes to the present sure are being, commandeered. Just really wonder. What was that other one? Oh yeah, the enabling input to Cortex. That Mind of Light PDF from the last video. And the whole optical internet, which I don't have it pulled up, but they also want an optical Li-Fi internet, I believe it's called. Li-Fi. Visible light, ultraviolet. So it's like, okay, you can get the whole cities all the way down to a nano scale, the brain, optical, like, how long will it take before we can just start, or stop beating around the bush? I don't know.